The wind swept across the wide open plains, carrying with it the sharp scent of sage and dust, a reminder that the land itself was alive, breathing in silence and sighs. Silas Kane, once a strong rancher whose name had been spoken with respect across cattle towns and saloons, now lived quietly in the fading corners of memory. His ranch, once bustling with cowhands, wagons, and the thunder of hooves, had become a lonely stretch of land, weathered fences leaning like old men against the wind. Silas himself bore the same marks of time. His beard had turned white, his shoulders bent from years of labor, and his eyes carried a distant sadness that spoke of battles fought and friends buried. He was not bitter, but forgotten, and there was a loneliness that clung to him like dust on his boots. It was during one of those long nights, so filled with terror that it pierced through the walls of his solitude. The air was cold, the earth hard beneath his boots, and the moonlight painted everything in silver shadows. Then he saw them, not far beyond the corral. A pack of wolves circled something small, something alive. Their eyes glowed like embers, their teeth flashing as they growled and snapped. And in the middle of that circle, a child, a young Apache girl no older than 10, stood trembling, clutching a stick, her face pale with fear yet her eyes burning with a strange courage. She screamed again, and the wolves drew closer. He swung the rifle like a club, striking fur and bone, shouting with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. The fight was wild, brutal, and desperate. At last, the wolves scattered, leaving the ground scarred with their paw prints and blood. Silence returned, heavy and raw. Breathing hard, Silas turned to the girl. She was shaking, her small frame wrapped in tattered clothes, her dark hair tangled and her eyes fixed on him as if unsure whether he was savior or threat. "You're safe now, little one. No harm's gonna touch you tonight." She did not answer, but in her eyes there flickered something unforgettable, a spark that would stay with him for years to come. For days after that night, the girl remained on Silas's ranch. She spoke little, her words in a tongue he barely understood, but her eyes told him everything. They were sharp, restless, always watching the horizon as though searching for a world beyond his fences. Silas gave her food, warmth, and shelter, and in return, she brought a strange new energy into the lonely cabin. She followed him as he fed the horses, studied how he chopped wood, and sometimes sat near the fire staring at the flames with an intensity that unsettled him. She was quiet, but she was not fragile. There was a fire inside her, and Silas could feel it burning. At night, he would wonder who she was. Was she lost? Was her family searching for her? Or had fate brought her to him for some reason he could not yet understand? She never answered his questions, only looked at him with eyes that held both fear and trust. The silence between them became its own language, a bond beyond words. The townsfolk noticed, of course. When Silas rode into town for supplies, he heard the whispers. Some looked at the girl with suspicion, muttering about savages, while others kept their distance. But Silas stood firm. In his heart, he felt a strange protectiveness, almost as though she was the daughter he had never had. Weeks passed, and winter loosened its grip on the land. The snow began to melt, the rivers swelled, and the grass stretched green once more across the plains. Then one morning, Silas saw riders in the distance, Apache warriors, proud and fierce, their horses moving like shadows across the horizon. It was fleeting, but it broke the wall of silence between them. When the riders reached the ranch, they spoke in their own language, their voices strong, their faces stern. One of the men, tall, with a feathered headdress, nodded at Silas, a gesture of respect, and then they rode away with the child. The ranch was quiet again, too quiet. Silas stood by the fence long after they were gone, his heart heavy. He told himself it was for the best she belonged with her people, but deep inside, he knew something had changed. In the silence of his ranch, he felt her absence more sharply than he had ever felt his loneliness before. That night, as he stared into the endless sky, Silas whispered to the stars, "Take care of her. She's got a fire in her that the world's gonna need one day." He didn't know then that his words would carry across 15 years of silence, waiting for the moment when destiny would bring her back to him. The days after the girl's departure stretched into long, hollow months. Silas returned to the rhythm of his forgotten ranch, mending fences, tending the few cattle that remained, riding the borders of his land, but nothing felt the same. Where once he had walked in silence without noticing it, now the silence pressed on him like a weight. He would glance at the cabin and half expect to see her small figure sitting by the fire, but the cabin was empty, and the only footsteps that echoed were his own. In town, the whispers followed him still. Some said the old rancher had gone soft. Others claimed he was strange for sheltering an Apache girl. Silas never answered them. He knew what he had done, and he carried no regret. What the others couldn't see was the memory of her eyes, the determination that had burned there, even when wolves had circled her. That look haunted him, but in a way that gave him comfort. It was a reminder that he had once mattered, that even an old, forgotten rancher could play a part in shaping a life. The winters came hard that year. Snow piled against the cabin walls, and wolves howled again from the hills. Though they kept their distance from the ranch now, Silas would sit by the fire and let his mind drift back to that night, the rush of fear. He would remember how she had looked back at him one last time before disappearing with her people. That glance had said more than words could have. It told him she would remember. Yet as the years crept on, doubt began to whisper. What if she forgot him? What if he had been nothing more than a fleeting shadow in her story, while she remained a lasting mark in his? The thought tightened his chest, but he would shake it away. Deep down, he believed that the fire inside her was too strong to burn out, and that one day it would lead her back. One spring evening, as the sun set over the plains and painted the land in crimson and gold, Silas leaned on his fence and watched the horizon. He often did this now, waiting, though he would never admit it. The sky seemed endless, and he spoke softly into it, as though the wind itself might carry his words. If you remember me, little one, know that I remember you too. He had no way of knowing that his quiet words would echo through the years, across deserts and mountains, carried in the spirit of a girl who was no longer just a child. Her journey had only begun, and so had his, though he could not yet see it. Silas grew older, his back more bent, his hair more silver, but he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had endured both hardship and solitude. The ranch that had once been his pride was now little more than a skeleton of its former self. The barns sagged, the fences leaned, and the cattle thinned until only a few remained scattered across the plain. Yet Silas held on, stubborn as the land itself, refusing to abandon the soil where his sweat and blood had been spilled. In the quiet moments, when the wind rattled the windows of his cabin, he often thought of that Apache girl. He remembered the sharp defiance in her eyes even when surrounded by wolves. He remembered the rare flicker of a smile when she had seen her people ride in from the horizon. He remembered the way she had looked back at him before leaving. Those memories became a fire he kept alive in the darkness, proof that even a forgotten man could leave a mark on the world. But the loneliness was real. Many nights he sat at his table with only the ticking of the clock for company. He spoke to the wall sometimes, or to the fire, or even to the horses in the corral, though his words were more for himself than for them. Age weighed on him, not just in his body but in his spirit. There were mornings when he wondered if he had already outlived his purpose, if the world had moved on without him. Yet whenever despair pressed too close, he would think of the girl. Somewhere out there, she was alive. He believed it with all his heart. Maybe she was grown now. Maybe she had forgotten him. Destiny, he told himself, had a strange way of circling back. One evening, as the sky turned the color of burning embers and the prairie stretched endlessly before him, Silas leaned once more on his old fence. He looked to the horizon, where the sun sank low, and whispered into the wind, "I don't know where you are now, little one, but I reckon you'll do something mighty with that fire in you. And if ever you remember this old rancher, just know I ain't forgotten you." The land gave no answer, only the sigh of the wind through the grass. But Silas believed his words carried farther than his voice could reach. Somewhere beyond the plains, beyond the deserts and canyons, destiny was listening. And though he did not yet know it, his life was not drifting into silence. It was waiting for the day when the child he had saved from the wolves would return, not as a girl, but as a leader, a storm, a tribal chief,